I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. Today on Conversations on Dance, we are joined by musical director of the New York City Ballet, Andrew Litton. Andrew takes us on a journey from his days as a child learning about music by sitting in the orchestra pit at the Metropolitan Opera, to the first ballet performances he played accompanying Rudolf Nureyev, to the work he does now, bringing scores to life, rehearsing and conducting performances at the New York City Ballet. You can catch Andrew at the podium starting September 19th at New York City Ballet's fall season. Good morning, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to talk to you about your illustrious career, but we'd love to start right at the beginning and just hear, I guess, how you first began a life in music and at what point that started to intersect with dance.
Well, I was born on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. In fact, I was born 2 days after ground was broken for Lincoln Center. So I like to refer to myself as the other West Side Story. Anyway, my kindergarten teacher apparently said to my mother, "You should give him piano lessons." We have no idea why. She's long gone, as in fact now sadly is my mother. But so I was an incredibly pathetically shy little kid. And so the way she got me to take my first piano lesson, there was a legendary chocolate shop right across the street on 72nd Street. This is decades before designer chocolates, like not even Godiva existed. It was called Schwartz. It was a family-run operation, and there were chocolate-covered marshmallows that were to die for. And so two things happened that day. I fell in love with music, and I got fat. But so I took to the piano immediately, and it was such an outlet that I lost my inhibitions basically. And of course, when a couple of years on, when I could actually play pieces, kids would gather around the piano and say, "Play, play." And so I got friends, and I certainly wasn't winning any athletic awards, so it was great to have an outlet that was something I could pursue. And when I was 10, I started going to the Leonard Bernstein Young People's Concerts. It would make a much better story if I told you it was the first one that I attended that was an epiphany. I was squirming just like all the other little kids, but the fourth or fifth one I went to, I came out and said to my mother, who picked me and my best friend up from, nobody was walking around the Upper West Side in those days unescorted. It was pretty dangerous. But I said to my mother as soon as we met her, I said, "I want to be a conductor." And she just rolled her eyes, because up till that morning, I wanted to be a fireman, but not just any fireman. I don't know if you remember your 1970s TV dramas, but I was going to be the one on the back of the hook and ladder, way up high. So people were still looking up to me, just a different and some form of control, I guess. But I was actually really serious, and I was very lucky. Neither of my parents were musicians, but they loved music, and we went to everything. I mean, I guess I was at the opera or a concert once or twice a week. It was incredible. And occasionally the ballet. I mean, I remember being dragged to the famous Balanchine Nutcracker when I was 5 or 6. And of course I loved it. It was an amazing experience. So to make a long story a tiny bit shorter, my family's best friend was the timpanist at the Met Opera, and he actually retired after serving 66 years in that position. It's the longest serving principal musician in the world, in history so far.
Wow.
So he was kind of a legend. But back in the 60s, when he was quite a bit younger, he said to my parents, "Okay, I got this." And so the deal he made with my mother is, if I finished my piano practice and my homework, I could go sit in the pit next to him. And so I was at the Met 2-3 times a week, starting from the age of 11. And it was amazing. And that lasted till about the year before I graduated from high school and got into Juilliard. There was one performance of the Magic Flute where there were like 80 people in the pit. And of course, it's a Mozart opera, which has like 40 maximum people. So many of the musicians saw me over the years sitting in the pit at the timpani, they figured they could bring their students in to watch too. And
Uh,
it was just, so the management said enough already, but it was fine. I
right.
learned so much from that vantage point. I could see 2/3 of the stage. I could, of course, see the conductor very clearly. And by the time I was 13 or 14, I could read the score, not just
Mhm.
piano parts, but the whole score with all the instruments. And so he would set me up with my own lit music stand. I was wedged between the wall of the pit and the biggest drum, the 30-inch timpani. And
Mhm.
uh, it was it was phenomenal. In the beginning, of course, I didn't know when all the subito fortissimo loud timpani rolls were in Italian opera that are every time somebody's been discovered to be a traitor or an adulterer or whatever. And so he'd go, "Psst," and I'd grab my ears. And of course, within 2 or 3 years, I knew where they happened in Tosca and Carmen and all those La Boheme.
Right.
So
Uh,
it was fine. But anyways, an incredible educational experience. So I get into Juilliard. First year, um, I as a piano major, and I hadn't even auditioned for the conducting program yet. I didn't know anything really, and I don't know, about February or so of my first year, I got kind of depressed because there were 199 other pianists who
mm.
it seemed could play everything faster and louder than I could, which of course is your objective when you're 18. Um, and but then suddenly one night about 11 p.m., the phone rings, and it's a friend of mine, was an older student at Juilliard. He said, "Andy, you got to do me a favor." I said, "What's up, Bill?" He said, "I took a gig playing some ballet, and I can't. It's the 1 week in the year I have another engagement, and they won't let me out of it."
Mhm.
I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "It's playing solo piano on stage with Rudolf Nureyev. Have you heard of him?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "And it's more involved. There's the Schubert Trout Quintet, besides the Bach Busoni Toccata and Fugue, and a new Cole Porter arrangement by some guy called William Balcom, who, of course, became a major composer after that, basically." So I thought about it for 5 minutes and called him back and said, "Absolutely." And of course, it was the first one of my first professional experience with none other than Rudolf Nureyev on stage at what was then called the Minskoff Theater on Broadway, and his friends, it was Nureyev and Friends, was the Murray
Mhm.
Lewis Dance Company, and of course Murray Lewis was a larger than life character, and so I got thrown into this amazing world of physical perfection and watching ballets be created, and it was like so inspiring. And then back to school, the next morning. But it was amazing because, as luck would have it, I got mentioned in both the New York Times, the New York Post very favorably. So I walked into school the next day and everybody's like, and I suddenly became somebody thanks to ballet. In fact, it was really interesting. And so I became like the house pianist for a couple of years for the Niederlander group, the producers of all these various ballet shows. And so I got taken out to LA with a group of other New York musicians to do Pierre Lunaire with Nureyev, and I think it
Mhm.
was Yuri Killian, it was his choreography. And
Mhm.
then the most exciting after that was Makarova started her own ballet company in 1980. Didn't I don't think it lasted terribly long, but we had this season at what's now called the Gershwin Theater,
Mhm.
and it was amazing. There were 6 ballets, 3 of which were keyboard ballets. So I was very busy, and
Mhm.
after that, one of the members of the corps and I got friendly. In fact, we started going out, and she had just gotten into New York City Ballet. So I also knew from another connection one of the ushers, and this was way before security. So I literally snuck into the ballet instead of the opera. Now it was the ballet 3 or 4
Right.
times a week,
Mhm.
and there were some pieces that absolutely blew my mind. The pieces of music that I actually learned because I saw them first at New York City Ballet. So it's
Mm.
really
Right.
so it's talking about cart before the horse. Um, examples. Ravel G major piano concerto. Of course, it's called in G major. Jerome Robbins.
Mhm.
I was playing Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky and Beethoven. Ravel. I don't know some of the solo pieces. Never heard the piece before, and of course, start watching this incredible choreography, particularly the second movement, which is the high
Yeah.
point of the piece. Anyway,
Right.
it blew my mind, and I ran out and bought the music the next day and started learning it, and it became a party piece. I conduct it in concert many times. over the
Mhm.
years. But it's thanks to Jerry, thanks to Ravel. I mean,
Uh,
Oh,
in a way, or
yeah.
thanks to my piano teacher. I mean, it was one of
right.
those things. Another, of course, I'm sort of an expert on Gershwin, but I had never really learned Concerto in F. And then I saw
Mhm.
Balanchine choreography to it. I thought, this is fantastic. I got to learn this
Mm.
piece. And then finally, Who Cares, which is coming back this season in a modified form. Talk to you about that in a second. Um, I was like, this is incredible because as a pianist, I had a reprint of the original Gershwin songbook, which
Mhm.
George Balanchine had sitting on his bookshelf. The original Gershwin songbook was published in 1932 because all of Gershwin's friends kept saying to him, these fantastic arrangements you play at these elite social gatherings every night. Uh, write them down so we can try and play them too, because of course there were
Mhm.
no recording devices back then. Nobody
Right.
could stick on a Walkman and tape it. So he obliged, but the frustrating thing is that he only set down one chorus of, I think it's 16 songs. So he didn't flesh them out. So Balanchine had that idea on one rainy Monday afternoon. Let me get Hershey K to
Right.
flesh them out and add the intro, add a verse, chorus,
Mhm.
bridge, chorus out, and the second
Right.
chorus would be the piano solo. So
Mhm.
it was a fantastic way of giving life to this this book, which otherwise just sits on bookshelves and looks pretty. It was
Right.
published with these amazing kind of perverse illustrations as well by a Russian artist, obviously a friend of his, I guess. Anyway, the funniest thing is years later, I'm now working at City Ballet and I meet Alistair Macaulay. The one thing we
Mhm.
disagree on is the Hershey K arrangement of Who Cares?
Ah,
Because I think it's adorable and he hates it.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, it's kind of, I don't know about controversial, but it definitely has its detractors. Some people are not fans. I wonder if that's just like the way that they grew up listening to those songs, or they have like a nostalgic attachment to it in a specific way. Whereas most of my associations with those songs are from the ballet. So
right.
Right, right.
I'm a fan of the K arrangement.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, so fast forward to 2023, we have this big gala coming up, and so I've hired composer Robert Miller to. Oh, I should explain. We're adding voice to these songs, the seven songs, the eight songs. Sorry, that the soloists, the principals dance,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mhm.
so we need a new arrangement basically. So and
Mhm.
the constraints to the arranger is it has to fit this choreography because the Balanchine stuff isn't going to change, but what you
Mm.
listen to
Right.
is going to change. So
Right.
it's
Mm.
fantastic. He's about halfway through them. Embraceable You sounds great. Vanessa Williams is going to be singing that, and
Wow.
it's yeah, it's
Okay, who's doing Man I Love? That's all I care.
uh,
I care about all of them, but
Kelly O'Hara,
oh
and
wow.
yeah,
Star
and
power. Okay.
exactly. No, it's gonna be amazing. So
Mm.
so that was another one of the ballets, of course, that changed my life, as it were, because I actually made the first commercial recording of Who Cares of the Hershey Cake back
Wow.
in the mid '80s. So
Mm.
so ballet, in a funny sort of way, was very influential at the beginning of my career because my career started in
Mhm.
1982. I won a conducting competition while I was still at Juilliard, and that was it. Suddenly management, and
Mhm.
about 6 months later, just the week after I graduated with my master's, sitting around going, okay, now what? And the phone rings, and it's the National Symphony in Washington calling, saying our music director, Mstislav Rostropovich, wants you to come down and audition. We have an assistant conductor opening. So I went down and I got the job, which was so amazing. So um, moved away from New York for the first time in my life because, of course, when you go to Juilliard, you're there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there were no
Yes.
dorms back then. There were no dorms. So
Mm.
my friends used to give me grief. Oh, Litton, you live in an 8-room apartment on Central Park West with two and help. Meaning my parents. But
Uh-huh.
they didn't resent me or anything. But
Mm.
my mother ran a soup kitchen. She said, bring whoever over. So she just fed all everybody was loved my mom.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so anyway, there I am. 2014 is rolling along. I mean, I've run a bunch of different orchestras in my life, starting with Bournemouth in England for 6 years, Dallas for 12 years, Bergen, Norway, Bergen Philharmonic for 12 years,
Wow.
Colorado for 5 years. And actually, it was while I was in Colorado, I got the invitation from Peter Martins to come and conduct Capella. And I thought, sure, I'll give it a go. And, it's one of those pieces actually that for weeks after you finish conducting it, you're still singing the songs. Da da dum dum da da dum.
Yeah.
Songs, the tunes. It's nasty in that way. It just, you can't get it out of your head. But I had so much fun. It was just a weekend with 4 performances. My companions were Tyler Peck and Megan Fairchild, so couldn't be two nicer people to break me in, as it were. And
Mhm.
and Joaquin got injured, so Andy Vallette wound up dancing the male lead in all of the performances, and it
Oy.
was just
Wow.
it was really fun. And so that was February, and I guess in June, my management gets a call saying they'd like to offer you the job. And so my first actual conducting, because I had so much work still in the calendar, was not until the 2015 Nutcracker. And we do 48 Nutcrackers, but whoever opens it gets the rehearsal.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh.
so it was
Yeah.
it was really fun, and I think I fixed a lot of old and not so great habits.
Can we talk about that a little? Because there was a New York Times article where you were talking about your first Nutcracker, and that, I think this music has been played for centuries. Like,
Right.
how are you breathing new life into something like Nutcracker that everyone's so familiar with?
Well, one of the things to remember is Nutcracker's by somebody. It's by Tchaikovsky.
Right.
And I've had the great privilege I've recorded all the Tchaikovsky symphonies, including Manfred, way back at the beginning of my career, and performed them many times, conducted Eugene Onegin at the Met. So it's not just coming to Nutcracker like it's a static piece. It's part of this huge, incredible output that this genius composer gave us. And so there's certain stylistic needs in Tchaikovsky. When he writes a woodwind solo, a line, it tells a story. Just think of the oboe solos in Swan Lake. Gorgeous. And he also was going through things cyclically. So at exactly the same time as he's giving the oboe this huge part in Swan Lake, he also wrote the Fourth Symphony, which has a huge oboe solo in the second movement. So it's clear that this sound was something that was capturing him at that moment. And I mean, that's almost meaningless, except that when you start approaching all the music as being from one source and having a sense of style to it, it creates a different understanding. So one of the things that I was surprised at is Waltz of the Flowers, one of the, I think, greatest waltzes ever written, and I'm including the entire Strauss family on this. I mean, it's just extraordinary waltz. And the French horns are going pa 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 pa, and I'm like, no, okay, there's no slur over it, which would be they're lines. And in Tchaikovsky, lines mean you sustain the sound to the next note, but there's a front. So I came up with this. Just it's one of those, you can't believe you've thought of this, because God, you must be a genius. How did you think of this at the moment? But sometimes one is just blessed, as you know, and come up with a great idea. And I said, this is by Balanchine. This is his Nutcracker Ballet. And you see how the longer notes, Balanchine.
Right.
So, and I sang it to them, and they're all like, eh. It took me 3 years to get rid of that
to get the
habit. And and it's funny because you go to conduct symphony orchestras in this music, and they just naturally play a long line because it's a lyrical line. It's not notey,
right.
So that was one tiny tip of the iceberg, but there were lots of things. And of course, I have to be honest, I've been conducting and following sound by the time I got this job for 37 years. But suddenly to be following sight, it is a completely different set of chops. And so it was a very steep learning curve. I think early on the dancers were rolling their eyes and going, oh my God, oh no, not Litton. Can we have one of the other people? But the good news is I think I know how music goes. And so it was just a question of knowing how to put the music to the dance,
Right, right.
and it's been, it's a much more comfortable place now for me. I
Right.
understand the dance steps and I understand what they need, and there's uh, great differences between when you need to follow a dancer and when they really kind of need to follow you.
Right.
And
The
and
frame, yeah.
the biggest thing for me that I bring to the table is, after all these years as an orchestra conductor, so much of our repertoire is concert music, concert hall music, not ballet. It
Hmm.
started life as a concert hall piece. And so for me, I
Right.
come in with that perspective and say to the repertory director, this really should go a little bit faster. By the second show, do you think I
Hmm.
can, push it forward a little
Yeah.
bit in this particular passage? And I've gotten them so that they'll come up to me and said, "Okay, go." And by the second or third show, and it's fantastic watching them fly around the stage. And then I come upstairs and I'm expecting dirty looks, and they said, "That was fun, Andrew."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they're trained for. That's what they like
Yeah,
to do.
yeah.
Wait, I want to get into some of the details of like what the musical repertoire is at New York City Ballet, but I know exactly one joke about classical music, and I thought maybe you would be amused by it. How many symphonies did Tchaikovsky compose? Three, the fourth, fifth, and sixth. It's a joke about, I guess that the first three are not thought to be as, you know, they're not masterworks on the same level as the fourth, fifth, and sixth. But the third symphony is what Balanchine used for Diamonds. And Balanchine chose to use Tchaikovsky's second piano concerto versus the first, which was very popular. So some of the things that are in the repertoire aren't necessarily like go to, like he only Barocco is really it for Bach, never touched Beethoven. So sometimes the musical rep isn't, I don't know. I guess if you're being snobby, maybe it's not top drawer, but what is, or you have things like Agon that isn't going to be played in a concert hall, or things like Bizet Symphony in C that Balanchine sort of maybe resurrected. Like you do have even though they're great musical works, it's not necessarily like the greatest hits of classical music. So what is that like conducting some of those works? And
Well,
how do you bring out the best of those?
Well, it's so ironic of some of the names you mentioned. Tchaikovsky Third, I call the Underdog Symphony, was the first one I recorded when I was recording all the Tchaikovsky symphonies in Bournemouth, because I believe in it so much. So um, the one thing I'm sad at is that he didn't bother with the first movement, Balanchine, because
Right.
the rest of I really love the rest of the piece, and
Uh-huh.
you've got to approach those early Tchaikovskys with just complete abandon and like
Mhm.
take no prisoners. And I'm not apologizing for this. It's got to have that
Yeah.
feeling. And I think Balanchine knew that, so that's why I think the choreography improves the music even, and that's the key. A lot of the repertoire you mentioned, the Balanchine has helped its shelf life. Nobody
Mhm.
knew Bizet Symphony in C till the 50s when he got a hold of it. And suddenly, wow, how
Right.
many times a year do we play it alone? And
Right.
orchestras and ballet companies all over the world have jumped on the bandwagon because it's actually a beautiful piece.
Hmm.
Even though he
Mhm.
wrote it when he was 19 and, as a school
Mhm.
exercise, it's kind of incredible. Um, Agon, absolutely. The one thing that attracted me so much to this job, because after doing same 40 pieces again and again, to come into a company where I suddenly had to learn Agon and Symphony in Three Movements. I love Symphony in Three Movements. That was one of the
It's our
ballets.
favorite. It's our
Yeah,
favorite ballet. We
that's
did. We went. Rebecca and I. We did like March Madness for Balanchine ballets, and you always think Serenade's going to come out on top, but the end we didn't look at each other as we shared it at the end. We both picked Symphony in Three Movements. It's hard to. It's just amazing. It's just
yeah,
perfect.
it is. And I never forget the first time I was going to get to conduct it. There was a party or some sort of reception the day before, and I ran into Barbara Horgan, and I said, "I'm so excited! Tomorrow's my first symphony in three." And she said, "Do you know he was driving everybody crazy when he created it because he couldn't figure out the counts?" And then Peter Martins corroborated that later. He said it was 2 weeks before, and he's still changing his mind, and we're going crazy. And he finally
Mhm.
walked in one morning, apparently 2 weeks before the premiere, smiling and says, "I got it, I got it." So what's fascinating for me is because the dance counts have nothing to do with the printed page of the music,
Naturally.
and
I'm sure.
but he of course could read music. He was a very fine pianist, so it's like something obviously inside his amazing brain just said, no, my one is going to be on the third beat of this part. It's like we
Hmm.
feel it. Like so sometimes we actually
Yeah.
literally have to start halfway through a measure, at dance rehearsals, so
Right.
that we're with them. Um,
Is that common in some Balanchine ballets? Have you noticed where the dancers have different counts? Like you're saying, he does read music. Is it
yeah,
corresponding with what you're looking at?
it's more common in the later compositions,
Mm.
the Stravinsky's. It's but to think we recently tried to recreate the Stravinsky festival that he did in 1972, I guess it was, or was it 73? I don't know, but
72.
72, yeah.
I know.
So we did I think I did 16 ballets, but that was nothing aside of what they did in 1 week. This is over two
Right.
weeks back
Right.
then, and of course they were all new. We only had
Hmm.
one or two new
Hmm.
things, so it just must have been insane. But to have come out of that, the violin concerto, symphony in three, and duo concertantes already a
Right.
yield like anybody would dream about, any choreographer would dream
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
I love the opportunity to work on a ballet from scratch with the choreographers because
Mm.
there's much more give and take, and also you can establish what the tempos are really going to be rather than being told later
Mhm.
it needs to be
Oh.
this. And so there's a wonderful sense of interaction. I had great time with Chris Wheeldon, his latest ballet, which was set to Schoenberg's Verklärte Nacht, until
Mhm.
I tested positive. So I didn't. I didn't get to
Oh
get back. I
no.
did all the pre-rehearsals, the orchestra rehearsals, and
Uh,
bye.
oh
Oh
no.
So,
no.
so that was a total bummer. But working now with Alexei Radmansky on choosing music for his next ballet. I don't want to tell you more because I think he's still thinking, toying between a couple of ideas, but brilliant
Mhm.
ideas. Szymanowski and Franck and composers that, again, like Balanchine, are underrepresented in
Mhm.
the orchestra pit and the
Right.
concert hall stage. So I
Right.
think I think it's a very wise thing in a way to take music, maybe lesser known works by great composers, because there's still something in there that
Hmm.
made them
Mhm.
great composers. And so what I love about City Ballet is the chance to conduct these works multiple times. Like the Stravinsky Violin Concerto, I probably did in concert hall 3 times in my career, and now suddenly I'm doing
Mhm.
it 8 times a
All the time.
season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a phenomenal piece. We got great
Oh.
violinists. So, you know, all of that stuff makes it really exciting and rewarding. Um, there was another ballet that, the most fun though I have when I do little lectures about the musical side of the business and ballet is Concerto Barocco, because
Mhm.
Balanchine was really astute as to what the tempo. He knew what the tempo should be, whether in the process he added a few more steps to make it impossible to actually do that tempo in whatever piece
Right.
is conceivable. But when Balanchine did his iconic Concerto Barocco, we had no idea what authentic instrument practice was going to teach us about the performance of Bach and Baroque music. So
Mhm.
he was probably listening to a Furtwängler recording from the 50s, when he came up with this.
Right.
Sorry, I have a terrible voice. And I then will put on Hilary Hahn from 2014, and it's
Mhm.
and can you imagine you start
No.
a tempo like that? But that's not wasn't Balanchine's fault. We didn't know. It took
Right.
it took literally the 70s, 80s, and 90s to teach us. All these learned scholars instructed us. No,
Mhm.
it's been
Mm.
wrong all these years. The 19th
Right.
century messed up performance
Mhm.
practice of Baroque music. And so,
Mm.
I'm still a dinosaur. I love the old fashioned stuff. I don't mind taking these ridiculously so Bach tempos, but that's the only place where he and innocently completely got the tempo wrong. And again,
Mm.
innocently.
Well, I remember there was some sort of, I think it was in Jennifer Holman's book they were writing about. I think it was Serenade, that there's Tchaikovsky wrote the tempo at a specific in a specific way, but then they kind of guessed that he had flipped a number. I don't know how this. I mean, I'm a musical novice here, but let's say it's like meant to be like I don't know let's say 127, but it was written as 172 or something, and then they were like, it couldn't be that. We're just gonna flip it. I feel like there are those instances where he was willing to take some liberty. Well, I mean, of course, flipping Elegy and the Russian section.
Yeah.
Why didn't he use the first section of the Third Symphony? That sort of thing.
Right. And how do you feel about that? Because this was one thing we talked with Alistair about. And Alistair Macaulay put us in touch, which is so great. So we're able to speak with you today. And when we talked to him about Serenade, that was one of the things we were talking about, the musical changes. And he was kind of saying, like, what would Tchaikovsky think? So what do we think?
I think Tchaikovsky, who, by the way, took criticism. I mean, he was always criticized by his friends, by his colleagues, reasonably well for saying, he was the greater genius than all of them put together. But I think because Balanchine had so much respect for him, they would have been friends had they lived at the same time. And I think Tchaikovsky would have worked well with him. I have absolutely no doubt that he would not have minded the flipping of the movements, because he didn't write it as a ballet. He wrote it as a piece of music, but you turn it into a ballet, it needs, and of course, as we watch this iconic ballet, another iconic ballet, you can't imagine it the other way around with a triumphant ending, and
right.
so Balanchine makes this change. He also adds a repeat in the waltz, which is maybe naughtier even, but the interesting thing I think that maybe Alistair was referring to is I own a DVD of in the late 50s, the company went up to Canada and filmed a bunch of Balanchine's ballets with the CBC Symphony. And there's a performance of Serenade where instead of the loud ending of the first movement, there's this big diminuendo, and he actually leaves out the last bar. Wow, there's no blast.
Yeah.
And then the couple is together and they go, dee-da-dee-da. It's absolutely beautiful. It makes so much sense. Instead of this loud, crashy string sound, it's just dee-da-dee-da-da. So I mentioned it to everybody, including Alistair, and they let me do it that way for one season. Balanchine Trust came back and said, put it back.
No.
And but it was really interesting. Everybody's like, wow, that's really interesting. I don't think they liked it better, but the point is that at one point Balanchine tried this, and I just thought it would be neat for everybody to hear it, including myself, in the context of the choreography.
I'm mad that I missed that, and that it's going in the fall and it's not going to be there. Because I'm a big Balanchine bunhead, but I don't know that I'm a purist in the sense that I don't always feel like we need to only see the last thing he ever did, like his last decision on anything. So I would love to see that, but I guess I'll be missing it. Because sometimes when you get the thwack, it feels a little dead in the water before you move into the next section, right?
Exactly.
But if you have that serenity,
you see, so it's sort of I thought just morphed into this waltz much more cohesively with the visual. And but the computer said no.
I wonder, from your very first performance with New York City Ballet of Coppelia till now, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned about dance and conducting for dance?
Well, the biggest lessons I've learned is what I'm looking at. Because before, as you can imagine, you're just looking at it. Oh, they're so pretty. That's so nice. Look at that. Can do that. That's incredible. It's like going to the Rockettes, for crying out loud, But then you get your chops together. You learn, what a fouette is, and do I follow them or do they follow me, and all that sort of stuff. And of course, it's also piece dependent. And as I said to you earlier, if it's a concert piece, I weigh in a little bit more heavily than if it's Swan Lake or Sleeping Beauty, because those are ballets, and I feel that it's like conducting bel canto opera. What the soprano wants, the soprano gets, and in ballet, what the prima ballerina wants, she gets. So, and so there's what I've learned is there's much more give and take tempo-wise, interpretively, than I first thought. It's just we've had to learn to communicate with each other because dancers don't know how to speak music and musicians don't know how to speak dance. We certainly don't know physically what it feels like to do what you guys are doing. And so to sort of learn that vicariously is part of the process that has now made it a lot easier for me to do my job. I feel like I'm not being embarrassing in any way, but to actually, there was I used to tell Tyler Peck, I love you so much because you make me look good. No matter what tempo I took, she nailed it,
Right.
But now, fortunately, hopefully that's not the case anymore.
We've had a couple conversations recently. We were talking to, for instance, Janie Taylor about this wild time where she had to basically improvise on stage a whole parada. We love those moments of live theater, and they certainly happen in the pit as well. I mean, our pianist, we were just talking about this, Rebecca and I were talking about this earlier, like our pianist in the middle of a performance of Polyphonia that we were doing, his sheet music blew away because in Florida that AC is always blasting. and like this pianist is pretty unflappable, but like I remember him practicing that score every morning. Like he was like this is the hardest thing. You have no idea. And so for that to be the ballet where his sheet music blows away, and he's just like, but I'm sure you have stories like that where you're conducting and something just goes awry and you have to just like on the fly go with it and correct it or whatnot.
Well, the funniest thing recently was Nutcracker this past year. I came in late in the run, and we have a new pianist who's fantastic, by the way. She's going to be playing Tchaik 2 when it comes this year. But we use a synthesizer for the boys' chorus at this. Most companies do, and we've been working on it since I got there, and I'm sure way before me, to try and make it actually sound like boys and not a stupid synthesizer,
Right.
So we finally got it so that it actually sounds really good. The balance is right in the house. So I turned to give her the first cue, and somebody had hit a button, and it went boop, 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 boop. It was
oh no!
So instead of getting mad, you just start laughing. I was roaring with laughter, and the dancers, the snowflakes are just like, what is going on? And of course, she's just a pianist. She didn't know what button to push to fix it. So so that will never happen again because she's been trained now and what to push and to make sure. But that was hysterical, and nobody got hurt.
That's good.
Honestly, I'm sure those snowflakes were happy. They were like a change,
something to think about.
Different.
Distraction.
Well, they're looking and laughing down at me like it was my fault,
Oh.
But it was
that's pretty good.
It was hysterical. Yeah, I went up on. I don't usually go up till the end, but I went up on stage afterwards and explained. So it was fun. But that's. I mean, otherwise there isn't really. Thankfully, fortunately, nothing catastrophic has happened so far.
One of our biggest stories Michael and I were talking about too was during Symphony in 3. For us, one of the someone who was supposed to be keeping the like the bass at that moment, like our count, like fell asleep or something and wasn't there. And so our pianist started trying to play what that was supposed to be, but then he was missing the piano and everyone was on stage like 3, 4.
It was so chaotic.
It was chaos.
I think it just like bottomed out. It's in the middle of the 6 principles dance. What we call row your boat because of the step you do. But it was just like you go there. It's like a little. It's a rest right before that, right before row your boat. Yeah. And then it was just like they just didn't come back in because it was so chaotic and disorganized. And we're just like, okay, I guess
what do we do now?
We just have to go with it.
Oh my gosh, no! They're fun things though that I've gotten involved with visually that I feel kind of good about because, for example, in the Infernal Dance in Firebird, at one point the kids who are running around do claps, but they were doing one more than the music. And I said to Rosemary, there is no way Jerry would have choreographed for 12 of those. There are only 11.
Uh-huh.
And she
Uh-huh.
said, oh, and so then I had to teach everybody the correct. And
Oh.
what's so funny is
So
you can't
fun.
even really hear it because they have
Mhm.
costumes on,
Uh-huh.
but it's the visual. There's no way
Yeah.
he was smart enough to know there's only 11. The
I
other
love
thing
it.
was when
Right.
we were doing Symphony in 3, I noticed that there's only so long you can hold the last chord, but they were getting to the final pose of the first movement late. And I kept saying, can't they start turning sooner? And it will
Mhm.
work. And so I managed to
Yeah.
achieve that. And I also said, please drop the curtain 2 seconds later because it starts to come down. People start to clap, but that freeze that
Mm.
is part of the visual. You
Mhm.
don't
Yeah.
realize that not only has the chord stopped, there's still a rhythm going, obviously, but the music has sort of frozen too, even though it's still
Mhm.
going. But the visual to actually register that
Yeah.
it's over, I think it's so much more telling if the curtain comes down just a second or two later. So again,
Mm.
that's the
Right.
only time I open my mouth. Otherwise, I'm like
That's
really
important. It's
impressed.
collaboration, you know?
That's
And
very important.
and
Yeah.
and the greatest thing is every night walking out into the pit, looking up at that gold curtain, and saying, "We're going to change lives," and we do.
Oh, you do. You do.
The
I mean, I
beautiful
still
note.
I
Yeah.
think so many of us remember our very first performance in that theater and like and it changes the course of your life.
Yeah, and I could
Yeah.
see the faces in the first row because if I turn around, because both stage light illuminates them, and there's just always like awe.
Mm.
There's never like you see in concert hall.
Right. Right.
I love
Well,
that.
maybe before we wrap up, could you tell us in over the course of the next year, which is the 75th anniversary of the New York City Ballet. So, that programming is pretty bonkers. I want to see everything. But maybe what you're most looking forward to conducting this year.
Well, I'm opening the season doing all the Juleses.
The
My
Jules is.
my favorite experience with that was when uh, one summer the Paris Opera Ballet Company and the
Mhm. Oh,
Bolshoi
right.
came over and
Yeah.
we swapped, but I was the
Right.
same conductor. It was fascinating
Mhm.
working with these two other companies. And Peter was like, he kept wanting to fix stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I said, Peter, calm down.
You have to
It's
let it
fine.
be.
It's fine. Yeah, they're our
Yeah.
guests. But that was great. So I love doing Jules. The also one of the later seasons, which is in spring, it must be Midsummer. I love Balanchine's Midsummer.
Mhm.
It's so great.
Yeah.
And but I'm looking forward to Tyler Peck's new ballet because it's her first ballet for us. And like I say,
Mhm.
I love working with her, but she's chosen a challenging piece, the Poulenc two piano concerto, which it's challenging for us getting two pianos in the pit, but
Yeah.
it's I think that's going to be a very exciting show, and that's it. I mean, otherwise I'm doing the return of Bourrée Fantasque, which I'm looking forward to.
Oh,
My
we
Master.
love
favorite.
that. We love that ballet.
Yeah, no, nobody knows it here. It's been a long time, so
We did it
The there's
yeah.
we did a lot in Miami.
No, but we did it
But
in New
there's
York too,
another
at Lincoln Center.
and we performed it in New York at the State
Mhm.
Theater. Well, I
Mhm.
call it the State Theater still.
yes, it will always be
Uh,
the State Theater. Yeah,
yeah. See,
so
but there's a perfect example of Balanchine. Maybe Balanchine, he's not always right about his own work. He let that fall out of rep.
yeah.
And we love that ballet.
So good.
That is cool. Now, so that's basically it. I mean, the I just am very excited to go back to work, and
Mm.
August is boring. I just can't wait to.
Yeah.
So, so very excited about it.
Yeah. Thank you
Great.
so much for your time. This was so much fun getting to chat with you. We love to hear the other side, different perspective. It's really fun for us. So thank you so much for joining us
Oh,
today.
it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for your interest in asking.
Thank you so much.
Conversations on Dance is part of the ACAST Creator Network. For more information, visit conversationsondancepod.com.